I think it's a super important exchange of viewpoints. And let me also express my personal gratitude, so to say, for Pakistan's diplomatic efforts in the negotiation over a ceasefire. So really delighted to be with you here today. I like to focus primarily on the maritime security dimension and the Strait of Hormuz, as this is my field of expertise, and then leave out the bigger questions that were already flagged for the discussion and later on. Now, to perhaps start with some general remarks about the current situation. First of all, I think it's super important not to cast the entire discussion on the Strait of Hormuz as one as opening versus closing. And that is really a misleading metaphor that was frequently floated in the Western media, and also US President Donald Trump has frequently used that. From a maritime perspective, you do not just open or close a strait like a door, right? And the notion of control or what level of navigation is currently possible in the strait is, I think, important, so we can focus on what is actually practically feasible. We have several nations negotiating directly with Iran over passage, including the fees paid. That is not in line with the law of the sea. States can charge for services, but not for general passage. So that is clearly not sustainable in the long run. However, it indicates that Iran is willing to negotiate conditions for shipping there. I think the UN Secretary General's task force on fertilizers and humanitarian aid is a super important initiative modeled quite obviously around the Black Sea Grain Initiative. It hasn't made much progress, unfortunately, and that's not only bad news for the world's farmers and for the people dependent on humanitarian aid in Sudan, but it's also a bit of missed opportunity, because that could provide the foundations for a future safety arrangement in the strait. It's obviously obvious that the hostilities need to stop, but right now we're at a difficult moment. The American ultimatum is still ongoing. The good news is that in a couple of hours we will have the UN Security Council actually voting on a new resolution, and the draft is available. It does not call for the use of force, but for cooperation among all states to deter attacks on shipping and also work towards a multinational coalition. So I think that could be an important step, because it is vital that we're not only looking into what can be done now in terms of a emergency solution to get more ships through the strait, but that we also start thinking a little bit about the midterm and even the long-term consequences here. And I think if it comes to midterm scenarios, the shipping industry will need a sort of assurance mechanism, because even after hostilities stop, however that arrangement will look like, there's still a high risk for the shipping industry that there might be provocative actions, that there might be even scenarios such as floating mines. So a multinational mechanism is absolutely vital here, and several proposals are already circulating of how that could look like. The UK has convened the meeting of 40 nations, including the European Union and several United Nations entities, such as the International Maritime Organization. Germany has floated actually the idea of creating a contact group for the Strait of Hormuz, and I think that is an absolutely fascinating idea that could work. This would consist of a regularly convened meeting of nations that want to support such a mechanism through a model such we had in the contact group on piracy off the coast of Somalia. That is a plenary with a rotating chair, regularly convened with different working groups that would look into military coordination, that would look into information sharing with the shipping industry, and possibly also address legal questions. So this could be something like a midterm mechanism for ensuring safety in the Strait of Hormuz. I think we should also think even beyond that in terms of asking ourselves whether it might be useful to start thinking about a dedicated treaty for the Strait of Hormuz. Treaties that we have for the Copenhagen Strait, the Copenhagen Convention, and that we have for the Bosporus, the Montreux Convention, because in both of these cases we have seen how vital legal clarification, a dedicated legal instrument can actually be to keep shipping open. That is not something that can be done within a year, but I think it's important that this becomes part of the long-term planning, and then indeed a contact group could provide the venue for having that discussion with a UN Security Council mandate that we're hopefully getting today, quite obviously in the background. If we are thinking about the long-term impacts, we also need to start addressing the question of how will maritime security be provided in the long run in the Western Indian Ocean. A less stable Iran is most certainly not good for crimes at sea. Let's not forget some criminal smuggling networks, in particular if it comes to heroin in the region, have been linked to the Iranian coastline. Elements of the Iranian fishing fleet have also been linked to illegal fishing operations. So that could mean that a less stable Iran could mean more crime in the region. Somali pirates have already tested the waters. Unfortunately, I've seen in this morning news that the European Union Operation Atalanta has managed to recapture the Iranian vessel that was hijacked by pirates. That is good news because it sends a clear signal to the pirates of Somalia that now is not a time to go back to action, and very, very important deterrent. One of the big questions, and here the Muslim Quad comes in, but also the Gulf Cooperation Council and configurations such as the Djibouti Code of Conduct and the Indian Ocean Commission's Regional Maritime Security Architecture, is how stable will maritime security be in the region in the long run. And that brings us to the role of the United States as a key factor of uncertainty in and for the region. Let's not forget that over the past 20 years or so, maritime security was chiefly in the hands of the naval hegemon, the United States. The Combined Maritime Forces, for instance, for now is clearly run by the US. It's fed by US intelligence and so on. Can the Combined Maritime Forces continue like this in the future? Will nations still be ready to follow US leadership like in the past? I have significant doubts about that. And then the question is, what is an alternative arrangement that builds on the foundations of CMF, but is not under US leadership? That is, I think, the big structural governance question that we need to ask for the Western Indian Ocean region. As a very last point, I think all of this also brings us to the question of how do we deal with maritime security more generally. And that is an issue that is also being discussed in strategic terms in the UN Security Council. And I've recognized that Pakistan, as an elected member of the council right now, has so far, unfortunately, not been very active in this debate on what the future UN structures for maritime security are. So if I can put one thing on my wish list today, then it would be to see Pakistani leadership also in the UN Security Council on maritime security for the time that it actually still has in the council.